We are back again with On the Money Line, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm your host Newsome, and we're back with a star-studded pay-per-view from Glendale, Arizona as we welcome UFC 263. We have a middleweight championship fight which is actually a rematch when both fighters were climbing the rankings, with the champion Israel Adesanya defending his title against Marvin Vettori. There's also a lot of bad blood here. Both fighters do not like each other. We then have another championship fight, which is again another rematch. This time we're in the flyweight division as Deiveson Figueiredo defends his title against Brandon Moreno after both fighters fought in a stone-cold war, one of the best fights we've ever seen, which ended in a draw at the end of 2020. And I have to mention Leon Edwards versus Nate Diaz, which has fireworks written all over it, along with this fight making history, as it will be the first 5 rounds non-title fight and non-main event fight in the UFC. It's a stacked card and we can't wait to break this down. But just before we get into those breakdowns, as always, there's a few things to mention in regards to MMA Play 365. The last event, in all honesty, was a dumpster fire and pretty much everything just failed to go our way. The 5 underdog dog of the week streak also crashed too, which is disappointing, but this is the fight game. One bad week or one bad month never defines us, so we trust the process and we move on. Remember, we have multiple packages on the MMA Play 365 website for all the UFC betting advice and DraftKings FanDuel advice that you'll ever need. We also have various subscription lengths and options too, so to see our full service list, please go and visit MMAplay365.com for more information or to sign up today. And let's break down some fights in the main event for the UFC middleweight championship, the rematch. We've got Israel Adesanya versus Marvin Vettori 2. Adesanya is currently the minus 255 favourite. The comeback on Vettori at plus 215 as the underdog. As for where the value is on the betting line, I do think the line's quite fair, if I'm being honest. I don't think there's a tremendous amount of value either way. However, if you are pushing me for a value side, I will say that I believe that Adesanya is a better bet at minus 255 than what Vettori is at plus 215. As for where the betting line moves throughout fight week, there's been some fluctuations since this line got released. Adesanya's been as low as minus 230, but then money came in on him. He went up to minus 260, is minus 275 in some spots as well. So there has been some fluctuation. I do expect this to continue. I know there's people out there that like Marvin Vettori as the underdog here, but there's obviously people that still believe that Adesanya is this elite striker, which I'm in that category as well. And I do think that even though we'll get some fluctuation, come fight night on Saturday night, Adesanya is going to be around that minus 260, minus 270 favourite. Now, as for how this fight plays out, it's a really good rematch, and it's actually crazy to think that the rematch between these guys from that first fight is in a title fight. It's amazing to see and just shows that some of the great prospects that we see in the UFC can go on to do phenomenal things, and I do believe that this fight is going to deliver. I think it's going to be a dogfight at times, but ultimately I don't see it going too differently to how the fight played out last time, and the main reason for that is in regards to both of the fighters' styles. They've not changed pretty much at all since what they were when they stepped into the cage the first time. It's just both fighters, as overall fighters with the skill sets and abilities, have developed and have leveled up to be world-class fighters. It's just going to be the same fight, except both fighters are much better than what they were the first time, and that's what's going to make this a better fight, because both fighters are more experienced. The quality is definitely greater than what it was before. And when you actually break this fight down and analyse it, I think it's quite simple. Obviously, you've got Adesanya, who is still this elite striker now. Something that I just want to mention really quickly is I don't think you can put too much stock into that Jan Blachowicz fight last time out. Adesanya was in a completely different weight class. He was upperweight. Blachowicz was absolutely huge. A fighter that could potentially fight at heavyweight in the future. He's that big of a light heavyweight, and he was the champion as well. He was the cream of the crop in that division. Adesanya went up to fight him. Now, the reason that you can't put too much stock into that fight is because everything Adesanya's done to this point, all his success, becoming the UFC champion, it's all been based around speed, movement, elusivity. And then when he went up into the light heavyweight division, he actually lost a lot of the speed. He lost a lot of the movement that made him become much slower, much more susceptible to be taken down. And that's exactly what Blachowicz did. So back down at middleweight, he's going to have that speed back. He's going to have his movement back. And I just don't think that you can say, oh, well, he went in there against Jan Blachowicz, got taken down a bunch of times, and that's exactly what Vettori is going to do. There's now a blueprint for Adesanya getting beaten by Vettori. I don't think that's the case. I do think Vettori will be able to get Adesanya down. I think he has to try and get him down, because if this fight stays standing in the striking department, as fun, as aggressive, and as angry as Vettori is, Adesanya is still an elite quality striker. He'll still piece Vettori up badly on the feet, and he'll make it look easy in my opinion as well. So Vettori's got to mix it up, he's got to use his wrestling, he's got to try and get Adesanya down regularly, often, and try and keep him down for extended periods of time as well, and that's how Vettori wins. It's just knowing that path to victory for Vettori, I just don't think that he's going to be able to do it over 5 rounds. 3 rounds, the last fight was super close. It went to a split decision, and listen, the first 3 rounds in this fight might be quite close as well, but the difference is this time we've got a 4th round, we've got a 5th round, and it's in those rounds where I think if Adesanya has struggled within the first 3 rounds, which I'm not convinced he will, it'll be those rounds where he really starts stepping it up. He really starts putting the pressure on Vettori, and Vettori can be hit. We saw that against Jack Hermansson. Hermansson didn't outland him or anything like that, but there was moments in the fight where Vettori was getting hit way too much than I thought he would have done against somebody like Hermansson. You exchange Hermansson with Adesanya in those spots, and Adesanya just absolutely styles on him. So I do think that Vettori, as I've already mentioned, has a path to victory. He does have ways to win this fight. I just don't think it's going to be enough against the middleweight version of Adesanya, and over 5 rounds as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Israel Adesanya to win this fight, and still the UFC middleweight champion. In the next fight, in the co-main event, our second championship fight, in the flyweight division, we've got Deiveson Figueiredo versus Brandon Moreno 2. Figueiredo is currently the -230 favourite. The comeback on Moreno at +190 as the underdog. As for where the value is on the betting line, again, we've seen this fight already, and once again, I don't think that it's going to go too much different from last time out. However, because the fight was so close that last time out, I do think that Brandon Moreno at +190 is the betting line that holds the value in this spot, because a close fight like that, all it takes is 1 or 2 slight adjustments in the later rounds, or maybe how you start the fight, and suddenly the fight starts to flip the other way to how it went last time. So +190 I think is quite steep, and I think that is the value side if you're looking to bet the money line on this fight. As for where the betting line moves throughout fight week, again, as I said with the main event with Adesanya and Vettori, I think there's going to be some fluctuation, but I don't think the line's just going to ping off in one direction for either side. I think the fluctuations are going to be quite small, and ultimately when they step into the cage on Saturday night, I do expect the betting lines to not move too far from where they're sitting right about now. I wouldn't be shocked if Deiveson Figueiredo went in as a -210, -215 favourite, with Brandon Moreno roughly around the +180 mark. Now, as for how this fight plays out, as I've already mentioned, I don't think the fight's going to be too different from what we got last time. I think we're going to see another war. I think we're going to see constant early pressure from Figueiredo. I think we're going to see big punches from Figueiredo. I think we're going to have to see Moreno weather a storm again, like he did the first time around. But one thing that I would like to see from Moreno here, in regards to an adjustment and changing things up a little more from the last time they fought, is I want him to go back to his wrestling, because I feel that if he wrestles a little bit harder in this fight, he's got the cardio to last 5 rounds. He's got the cardio to last 5 rounds and get punched in the face hard repeatedly for 25 minutes as well. So I think he's also going to have the cardio to wrestle relentlessly for a few rounds if he needs to in this spot, and I do think that that would help him. He did get Figueiredo down a couple of times in the last fight, but Figueiredo was very quick to get back up to his feet. So if Moreno can score those takedowns, wrestle him, and just establish a top position, then I feel that his round winning in this fight will be better. But ultimately, as I've already mentioned a couple of times, I just see this fight playing out quite similar to how the last fight played out, and the reason why I'm hesitant to pick Brandon Moreno in this spot is because for him to win this fight, I believe that he's got to be as durable as what he was before. I think he's got to walk through the same storm, through the same fire as he walked through before. I think Figueiredo's going to be landing bombs on him. I also think Figueiredo's physical peak is going to be slightly better in this fight as well, because if you remember, he came right into that Moreno fight a couple of weeks after fighting Alex Perez, so that's 2 weight cuts in a short period of time. He's a fighter that does cut a lot of weight as well, that is a very heavy flyweight. So I do think that, well, I was surprised in the last fight that he performed the way he did over 25 minutes. I just didn't expect him to be able to have that sort of output and that sort of pace for 25 minutes, but this time I do expect that. I expect him to be a little bit better in regards to that as well. So going back to why I'm hesitant in picking Brandon Moreno here is because you're having to put your trust in Moreno to be as durable as he was before and to be able to weather those storms and just put your trust in that war of attrition. And when we're talking a war of attrition, I don't think there's many better fighters that do it better than Deiveson Figueiredo. I think Figueiredo is going to be exactly the same as he was last time, and if Brandon Moreno doesn't make those adjustments with the wrestling, I'm just not 100% convinced that Brandon Moreno is going to be able to survive how he did last time. And credit to Moreno, because not only did he survive, but he delivered back. This time around, I do think that it's going to be difficult for him to do it all over again. I think the pressure, I think the power, I think the big shots are going to come in from Deiveson Figueiredo, and I think that he's going to hurt Moreno early in this fight, which if he doesn't finish him will take him later in the rounds as well. I do see a lot of similarities. Brandon Moreno's definitely going to have his moments in this fight. He's definitely going to have moments where he's looking really good. He's a top title challenger for an absolute reason. This fight has been rematched for a reason, but I just think Figueiredo is going to come out on top again in this fight. I think he's going to land more volume, especially early on. I think he's going to land the bigger shots, and I just don't put the trust in Moreno to make those adjustments in regards to the wrestling that I spoke about, which will definitely help him towards trying to win this fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Deiveson Figueiredo to win this fight and still the UFC flyweight champion. And in the next fight, in our very first 5-round non-title fight, non-main event fight, we've got Leon Edwards versus Nate Diaz. Edwards is currently the minus 600 favourite, with the comeback on Diaz at plus 450 as the underdog. As for where the value is on this betting line, again, I think the betting line's accurate, but obviously the minus 600 is a very big line on Leon Edwards to be playing. I feel that although the line is accurate, if you are absolutely pushing me for a value side, I would say that the plus 450 on Nate Diaz is the better bet than the minus 600 on Leon Edwards. But to be honest with you, I wouldn't even be risking the plus 450 because I do think that Leon Edwards has got a good fight ahead of him here, which I'll talk about shortly. As for where the betting line moves throughout fight week, I do think that minus 600 is, like I've already said, a massive number. I'd be very surprised if this went to minus 650, minus 700. I think that'd be ludicrous. I do expect a little bit of money to come back in on Nate Diaz, but again, I think a lot of people are seeing it the same way. Plus 450 is a nice number, but do you really want your hard-earned money on it? Probably not. So I don't think the money's going to come in too much on Nate Diaz. Ultimately, when they step into the cage on Saturday night, I think the betting lines are going to be very close to where they're sitting right about now. As for how this fight plays out, though, I'm really glad that Leon Edwards has got a high-profile fight here, and to the point where he's making UFC history with this 5-round fight as well. And he's also got a good stylistic fight ahead of him as well. Nate Diaz is, at this point, a one-dimensional fighter in regards to how he game plans. So what I don't mean is that Nate Diaz can only strike. Obviously, he's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. He's sick on the mat, and he's such a tricky fighter to deal with. But in regards to his game plan, he doesn't really relentlessly wrestle. He doesn't look to get fights to the mat with a matter of urgency. He's just happy to strike, and if the fight falls to the mat, then that's great. He'll cope with it at that point. And in this fight against Leon Edwards, I think even if Nate Diaz did come out, look for wrestling, look to take Edwards down and force the fight to the mat, which is not really a style, but just hypothetically, if he did do that, Leon Edwards' wrestling is really good. He's difficult to take down. He's good offensively as well. He's good in the clinch. He's got good hooks. He's got good elbows inside the short range in the clinch as well. So I think that even if Nate Diaz had that game plan here, I don't think it would work. And this is why the betting line's so wide, because then you look at the fight on the feet. And I actually think in moments this fight might be close, but Leon Edwards is going to pull away at some point, in my opinion, on the feet. And if he's not, if he is getting pieced up, I could actually then see the offensive wrestling from Edwards really playing a factor in this fight. And it wouldn't shock me if Edwards had this in his game plan, or at least in a plan B, just in case Nate Diaz does start to crack him with hard strikes that, or just volume strikes that he doesn't like. And I think that Edwards' quality in his offensive wrestling would be enough to take Nate Diaz down. And again, Leon Edwards has got decent jiu-jitsu as well. He never really puts himself in too much danger. He's had a couple of submission attempts fired at him before, but ultimately he does look comfortable on top. I think that Nate Diaz can be taken down, and as good as he is on the mat, I feel that he's not going to cause Edwards too many difficulties off his back either. And it strikes me as the type of fight that if Edwards did take him down as well, that Diaz would just be happy to lay on his back and try and hit triangles and arm bars, ultimately getting punched in the face, and Edwards having extended periods of time in top position, which is going to look good on the judges' scorecard should it go 5 rounds. So this is why I believe the betting line is as wide as what it is, because stylistically, I feel that Edwards might be the better striker. If he's not, I think his offensive wrestling is better than the defensive wrestling of Nate Diaz. I think that the top game of Leon Edwards on the mat is going to be able to nullify the bottom game of Nate Diaz, and I don't think Nate Diaz's offensive wrestling is better than the defensive wrestling of Edwards, so that will help Edwards keep this fight vertical and keep Nate Diaz off the top of him. I think it's a great stylistic fight for Leon Edwards. I'm picking Leon Edwards to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got the legend that is Demian Maia versus Belal Muhammad. Belal Muhammad is currently the -230 favourite. The comeback on Maia at +190 as the underdog. As for where the value is on this betting line, honestly, with the win condition that Demian Maia has, with his game plans, his path to victory, I feel that the +190 number on the betting line is the value side, opposed to the -230 of Belal Muhammad. And as for where the betting line moves throughout fight week, I think we've got two sides of people here. I think we've got side A, which is Demian Maia's washed, and at this point he's probably going to get beaten by anybody that's tough, durable, gritty, grinding, that can fight at a high level, which does describe Belal Muhammad. And then I think there's the other side of people, which is the side that believe that Demian Maia, regardless of how old he is, he's still got the qualities in the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu where he's one of the most dangerous fighters still to this date on the planet. So I think there's going to be a bit of fluctuation. I don't think that Maia's line is just going to get absolutely steamed and Belal Muhammad's going to come in as a -150 or a -160 favourite. I don't see that happening. I do see the line staying pretty close. I don't think it's going to ping off in a certain direction, but I do think that come fight night on Saturday night, the lines will be a little bit shorter. I think we'll see Demian Maia at around +170, +175, with Belal Muhammad around -195, -200. Now, as for how this fight plays out, it's a really interesting fight, especially from Belal Muhammad's side of things, because one thing that you have to take into consideration, knowing that Demian Maia is going to want to get the fight to the mat, knowing how good he is with his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, how tricky he is to deal with, even if he pulls guard on you and pulls one of his half guard sweeps and ends up on top. Belal Muhammad has fought 13 times in the UFC and he hasn't fought a legitimate, out-and-out, prominent wrestler or grappler. The closest that he's got is probably Chancellor Encounter, which is just a joke at the minute when you're trying to compare Chancellor Encounter to someone like Demian Maia. All the fighters that Belal Muhammad has fought in those 13 fights have either been strikers or they've been just like Belal Muhammad, good everywhere, doesn't excel in one particular discipline, isn't prominent in one particular discipline, but just really good in every facet of MMA. But this fight with Maia is just completely different, so it's going to be really intriguing to see how Belal Muhammad handles that, because if this fight stays striking, if Demian Maia can't get this fight to the mat, or if Belal Muhammad defends all the takedowns, keeps out at space, then I think Belal Muhammad wins this fight 9 times out of 10 on the feet. I just think he's a much better striker than Demian Maia. Although he doesn't pose a massive knockout threat, I still think he's more dangerous on the feet than Maia. He's got better movement, he angles better, in and out of range, he'll land more volume. So if this fight stays on the feet, then Belal Muhammad wins this fight. I've not got a doubt in my mind. But the thing is with Demian Maia, although he's aging, he's 43 years old, I don't think, watching tape on Demian Maia, that he looks too different right now than what he did 2 or 3 years ago. And one of the reasons for that is because when a fighter gets up in age, gets close to the end of the career, if that's a fighter that's been reliant on speed and movement throughout the career, those are the things that go in the old age. Whereas with Maia, he doesn't rely on speed and movement. He never has. He relies on closing the distance, getting takedowns, using physicality, and then using his world-class Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And those attributes don't disappear the longer and the older that you get in this fight game. So I still think that Demian Maia, although he's not the fighter he once was, you know, he's not youthful, he's maybe not as athletic, but he's still got his solid win conditions in this fight in regards to being able to get the fight down to the mat. If he does get Belal Muhammad down, I know we haven't seen much of Belal Muhammad in regards to his defensive Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but there's not a doubt in my mind here that Demian Maia won't have success on the ground against Belal Muhammad. We know how good Demian Maia is. He's world-class down there. If he doesn't submit Belal Muhammad, then he'll just happily just control positions, do enough on top to stop the referee from separating them, and just steal rounds that way. So this is why I think that Demian Maia is live in this spot, because I do think he's going to be able to get the fight down to the mat. He's got a plethora of different ways that he tries to get it done, from single legs out in open space, double legs, pulling guard, half guard sweeping, clinching up against the cage, getting a body lock, trying to sneak around the back, hopping on the back, dragging the fight down that way. He'll get the fight down in multiple different ways. So for an opponent of Demian Maia, you've got to be really sharp in that respect. You've got to have your wrestling, your speed, your movement on point, otherwise you are going to get taken down. Now I think looking at this fight, Demian Maia is going to be able to score at least one takedown in at least 1 or 2 rounds, which is going to make the fight very close at the very least. I don't think that Belal Muhammad's going to be able to go in there and knock him out like Gilbert Burns did. I think that Maia's going to get the fight down to the mat. I think he's going to have solid moments. If he doesn't submit him, I think he's going to be able to steal 2 out of 3 rounds here. For those reasons, I'm picking Demian Maia to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a fun one in the light heavyweight division. We've got Paul Craig versus Jamahal Hill. Hill is currently the -280 favourite. The comeback on Craig at +240 as the underdog. As for where the value is on the betting line, even though the line's quite wide, I do think that Jamahal Hill holds the value at -280. I think stylistically it's a really good fight for him. As much as I love Paul Craig, I just think that he's got a bad fight ahead of him stylistically, and from a skill set and quality perspective and where the fight I believe is going to be won and lost, I do feel that Jamahal Hill warrants that -280 betting line. Now as for where the betting lines move throughout fight week, although I see value on that -280 of Hill, I do also feel that the line has peaked at around that. I know he's -300, -330 in other spots, in other books around the world, but at -280, and that's at 5 dimes, I do feel that that might be the peak of the line. I think at +240 there's going to be enough people enticed into betting Paul Craig, because he does have a solid win condition with the triangle submission should he be able to pull guard or score a takedown. But yeah, I think there's going to be a little bit of fluctuation. It wouldn't shock me if Jamahal Hill went up at -300, -350, but I feel that at around -280 it's probably going to close at around that sort of betting line. Now as for how this fight plays out, honestly I really hate to do this to Paul Craig, and anybody that's been listening to these podcasts for the years that I've been doing them knows that I'm a fan of Paul Craig, and I've been there. I've defended Paul Craig when everybody's calling him a can and saying that he doesn't deserve to be in the UFC. I've been one of the very few people that I've seen on the internet really back Paul Craig, defend him and say that he's a better fighter than what people give him credit for. So if you're Paul Craig and you're ever listening to this breakdown, I apologise for how I'm about to do you with how I'm breaking this fight down, but unfortunately I just feel that this is a really good fight for Jamahal Hill. And first of all, you've got to consider where this fight is going to be won and lost. I could see Paul Craig being able to take Hill down a couple of times in this fight, but Hill's really tricky to hold down, and even though Paul Craig is a seriously good grappler in my opinion and has the abilities to keep fighters down, Jamahal Hill's just so quick at trying to get back up to his feet. He doesn't let himself get settled on his back before starting to work and starting to try and climb back up to his feet. He uses the momentum of the takedowns and the scrambles and just quickly bounces back up off his butt to try and get back to the feet. So I think Paul Craig is going to go into this fight looking for takedowns. I think he has to, and if he doesn't do it early, I don't think it'll take him too long to realise that Jamahal Hill is actually a really slick striker with a lot of volume and a lot of pop with his straight punches down the middle as well. So I think Craig will turn into a relentless wrestler at some point for as long as this fight lasts. But I think the more desperate that Craig gets, the easier it's going to be for Jamahal Hill to see the takedowns come in and defend them and keep the fight vertical. And this is where I see the biggest gap in skill in this fight, because whilst this fight is on the feet, although Paul Craig has developed his striking over the past few years, I just don't think it's anywhere close to being on the level of what Jamahal Hill's striking is at right now. Like I say, volume, pop, power, straight punches. He fires a variety of different attacks as well. He uses his kicks, his knees, his elbows. He's athletic. He gauges space really well also. And even in the small cage in the apex, he was just able to constantly find the space to move and strike. So in the bigger cage this time around, I think he's going to really flourish there. He's going to have more room to move, and I think it's going to benefit him in the fight. I think he's going to land a lot of volume. I think he's going to really put it on Paul Craig. He's definitely going to have to work defensively at moments in regards to defending takedowns, and if he is taken down, defending wisely with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, standing back up up to his feet, using that momentum of the takedowns and the scrambles to get back vertical. But ultimately, I see this fight being won and lost on the feet, and that's just where I think that Jamahal Hill is so much better. I think he's going to be able to piece Paul Craig up. I think he's going to be able to hurt him, potentially finish him as well. I'm picking Jamahal Hill to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is a fight where I feel a lot of people have circled as one of the fights to watch on this card. We've got Drew Dober versus Brad Riddell. Dober is currently the -140 favourite. The comeback on Riddell at +120 as the underdog. As for where the value is on the betting line, I think it's going to be a good fight. I think it's going to be an explosive fight, but I feel that the value is with Dober at -140. I feel the MMA experience does sit with him. And Dober's also a fighter that's looking really good. He's developing from fight to fight and he's showing promising signs that he could start flying up the rankings at this point. So yeah, for me, the -140 is the value side. As for where the betting line moves throughout fight week, I do think that this -140 line won't go too much higher though. We might see it at -150, but at that point I think people are going to start betting on Brad Riddell because of who he is as a fighter and as a striker as well. So I think the -150 would probably be the peak of Drew Dober's line. I actually see money coming in on Brad Riddell the closer we get to fight night, so that -140. I think Dober is going to go into this fight at around -130, with Brad Riddell roughly at around +110. As for how this fight plays out though, from an analytical perspective, it's quite easy to analyse in regards to where you feel the fight's going to be won and lost, because I think it's going to be won and lost on the feet. Both fighters like to strike. You've got Drew Dober, who for me is the more well-rounded fighter here, and that is something that you have to take into consideration, because if the striking's quite even, if the fight's quite close and one fighter decides to mix it up and to try and change the direction of the fight in order to try and win, then you've got to assume it's going to be Drew Dober looking for takedowns and looking to take Brad Riddell down. Riddell can get taken down. He's been taken down 14 times in his 3 UFC fights. He has got a good get-up game, granted, but Drew Dober's also got a really heavy top pressure game as well, where he can sit in the guard of his opponents, he can pass, he can remain safe, he can prevent get-ups and stand-ups as well. So, although I'm not saying that Brad Riddell won't be able to stand up if Dober takes him down, he'll just have to work really hard for it, which I feel that it'll be Riddell expending the energy in those scenarios, thus making it easier for Dober, whether he decides to carry on striking after that or go back to his wrestling, the longer the fight goes on. So this is why I'm ultimately leaning towards Dober, because although I do believe the fight's going to be won and lost on the feet, I feel that Dober could really mix things up. He's the more well-rounded fighter. But in regards to the striking, Brad Riddell is Alexander Volkanovski's striking coach, which says everything you need to know about Brad Riddell. He's a solid striker, good technical ability, a plethora of experience, years of experience in kickboxing and K1. So even though this is MMA, striking is nothing new to him, and he's very smart. You can see the fight IQ when he's at range, making his reads, coming into range wisely, exiting out of danger, and he also doesn't have a problem getting into the close boxing range and exchanging in a firefight, which I think this is what we're going to see a lot of. Brad Riddell can be drawn into that firefight. Dober loves the firefights inside the pocket. So for me, when I'm looking at that and I'm analysing which fighter's going to get the better of the other, I mean, one punch could change anything from either side, but for me, Drew Dober is so calm and composed. You can just see that he doesn't panic when bombs are being winged at each other on each side. Dober doesn't close his eyes, he doesn't duck, he doesn't move out the way and try and back up when things get a little bit too hot and heavy. He's just so calm and composed, and it's almost like he sees everything coming just because of how calm he is. And inside those firefight exchanges, I really like Dober in this fight. I feel that these firefight exchanges are going to happen multiple times. I feel Dober's going to get the better of Brad Riddell. I think Riddell's going to have his moments when the fight's a little quieter and they're at range and it's becoming a little technical. I think that's where Brad Riddell's really going to thrive. But ultimately, I think the bigger action strikes, the bigger moments in this fight are going to be in the exchanges in the boxing range. That's where I like Drew Dober. I also think Dober has multiple paths to victory because he can mix things up a little bit better. He's the more well-rounded fighter in regards to the wrestling and grappling, which I've already spoken about. So for all those reasons together, I'm picking Drew Dober to win this fight. And in the next fight, we have yet another rematch. We've got Eryk Anders versus Darren Stewart. Anders is currently the -150 favourite. The comeback on Stewart at +130 as the underdog. As for where the value is on the betting line, it's these types of betting lines that are about as accurate as they're ever going to be, because we've seen the fight once already. And in that last fight, Darren Stewart closed the -190 favourite. And Anders closed the plus 130 underdog. So there's a reason why the line's now completely flipped, and that's because Anders was looking better. The fight ended in a no contest due to the knee that Eryk Anders threw whilst Darren Stewart was down. But in regards to the value, it's accurate because we've seen the fight already. If you are going to push me for a value side, I would probably say that Eryk Anders maybe minus 150 is the value side, but I do have some questions with how that fight was unfolding if it didn't finish at that moment, so I'll talk about that soon. I think the line's accurate. Slight value if you're pushing me on Eryk Anders. As for where the betting line moves throughout fight week, I don't think it's going to move too much, if I'm being honest. It's definitely not going to ping off one way or another, just purely because we've seen this fight already and it is lined accurately, as I've already mentioned, so I don't think the betting line's going to move too much. I think both fighters, come fight night on Saturday night, are going to step into the cage with the odds sitting pretty much where they're sitting right about now. Now, as for how this fight plays out, I do have questions in regards to where the fight was going last time around, because when you watch the fight back, Darren Stewart started pretty okay for the first minute or two. Then Eryk Anders started to really take over. He hurt Darren Stewart. He almost had him knocked out. Stewart is tough, durable, so credit to him for hanging in there. And then Eryk Anders really started to unload on him. And Darren Stewart just wasn't going anywhere. Eryk Anders looking great from a physical perspective, but he also looked like he emptied a lot of his gas tank in those early moments trying to finish Darren Stewart. So then the fight went into a grappling realm, clinching up against the cage. Anders was trying to take Stewart down. Stewart was posted on the mat and Eryk Anders landed the illegal knee accidentally. It was a no contest and the fight ended there and then. Now, if that fight hadn't gone on and if Darren Stewart hadn't have been finished, I just wonder what Eryk Anders' gas tank would have been like for rounds 2 and 3, if I'm being honest, because he did look like he completely blew his load in that early moment in the fight trying to finish Darren Stewart. So, and that's ultimately when you ask yourself the question, well, why isn't this fight minus 200 Eryk Anders or minus 250 Eryk Anders? That's the reason that's preventing the line from getting that wide, because there's a lot of unknowns if that fight goes out the first round. Now, what's more intriguing in this fight is this fight's actually been booked at light heavyweight. So Darren Stewart's normally a middleweight. Eryk Anders has floated between both divisions in the past. I actually think Eryk Anders performs better as a light heavyweight, by the way. I think that Darren Stewart is going to be a little undersized at light heavyweight, and as I've already said, with Darren Stewart's breakdowns every single time, pretty much every single one of his fights has extended periods of time with Darren Stewart's back clinched up against the cage, and I just feel that if he's giving Eryk Anders, who looked the stronger fighter very marginally last time out, up at light heavyweight, I think Anders is going to be even stronger. I think Darren Stewart's going to be slightly undersized. I think that Eryk Anders is going to have more advantages in this fight up at light heavyweight than he did down a weight at middleweight. Sure, both fighters aren't going to have to cut weight, but I think that advantages Eryk Anders a little bit more. I think Anders is definitely going to be the stronger, more physical fighter. He's probably going to have more pop on his punches with the reduced weight cut as well. You could say the same for Darren Stewart, but I just think all things are just leading and edging towards an Eryk Anders win in this fight. But who knows, Darren Stewart up at light heavyweight, no weight cut, he might be an absolute monster, great movement, speed, have cardio for 3 rounds, which is always the question mark with Eryk Anders. So there's a lot of question marks on either side here. I personally leading with the fighter that was on his way to win last time out, the fighter that I believe is going to be advantaged by the fight being booked up a weight class. I'm picking Eryk Anders to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Lauren Murphy versus Joanne Calderwood. Calderwood is currently the minus 150 favourite. The comeback on Murphy at plus 130 as the underdog. As for where the value is on the betting line, I do think the value sits with Calderwood at minus 150. I did anticipate the betting line being a little bit wider, so at minus 150, I'll explain why soon. I think that Calderwood is the value side. As for where the betting line moves throughout fight week, I do think more money is going to keep coming in on Calderwood. That's the current trend right now. But I do think it can only go so far before people start betting Lauren Murphy. She's notorious for being in close fights that are close decisions and, you know, in some fights winning the fight when she probably shouldn't. So I think the line will only go so wide before money starts coming back in on Murphy. Ultimately, I think Calderwood's going to close at around this minus 150, maybe minus 155 line come fight night on Saturday night. Now, as for how this fight plays out, again, looking at where the fight's going to be won and lost, I do think we're going to see some takedowns and some clinch work from Lauren Murphy, but ultimately I think the best work, the most effective work, and primarily the fight is going to take place on the feet, so I think that's where the fight's going to be won and lost. And that's ultimately where I favour Joanne Calderwood here. Joanne Calderwood's a fighter that, yes, she gets hit, granted, but she also has unbelievable volume. She averages 6.59 strikes landed per minute. She's a fighter that will output 100 strikes plus in a 3-round fight, absolutely no problem. Doesn't drain the gas tank or cardio too much. She'll keep pushing forwards during those moments where she's racking up the volume as well. She is really good in all ranges. From the outside, she'll throw her straight punches in. She's got a good front kick which she'll throw to the knee, to the body, to the head of her opponent as well. So on the outside, throwing all the straight shots in, she's really good at that range. When she comes into range, she hasn't got a problem exchanging in boxing range. I don't think it's her best range, but she just doesn't have any fear, no problem in exchanging. And from there, she'll then push forward into the clinch, and this is where she really shines, in my opinion, with the Muay Thai background that she's got. She'll tie up in the clinch, she'll fire knees to the body, she'll fire elbows, and it's just volume, activity with Calderwood. She just completely pours it on, and it's hard to ignore it when, even though she's getting hit, like I said, she is hittable, but from a judge's perspective, it's hard to ignore the sheer numbers that she's outputting. Now, from Murphy's perspective, she's a dog fighter. She will accept all of these ugly, grinding type of fights, especially this fight as well, but she's predominantly a boxer, and this is where I think that she's going to have issues in regards to keeping up with the numbers in volume, because not only is she just a boxer in regards to predominantly using her hands, sure, she uses kicks as well, but the majority of the work comes from the boxing, and with that boxing, the target is normally the head of her opponent. She doesn't really mix things up to the body too well. It does tend to be head hunting, which again, like I said, I think it's going to give her problems with volume. Where Murphy's going to shine in this fight is when Calderwood decides to clinch up with her, close that clinch up as well, look to use her physicality, take Calderwood down and try and hold her down. Now, Calderwood's not the easiest fighter to take down, but she can be taken down. She's also got a little bit of inconsistency with a get-up game as well. You do see moments where Calderwood just springs back up to her feet, exits out the clinch, starts to go again with the striking, but there's also been some fights where she's taken down and she's been held down as well. Now, Lauren Murphy isn't any Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu ace, so I do think that Calderwood will be able to get back up to her feet, but for Murphy to give herself the best chance of winning, she's got to try and use that physicality, because I do think that she's going to be the stronger fighter in this fight. Clinch up, use the strength, try and score plenty of takedowns with extended periods of time on top. I just don't think that's going to be enough though over 3 rounds. Even if Murphy does clinch up heavily with Calderwood, even if she does take her down, I just think the numbers are going to be what the judges like in this fight. If there isn't a finish, and obviously it does go to the scorecards, but I don't think either fighter is too dangerous in regards to a finish, so I am anticipating this fight going to the scorecards. And like I say, I think the numbers and the bigger moments is going to be on the feet. I think the numbers are too hard for judges to ignore. So although Murphy's definitely going to have moments in this fight, I think she's definitely going to have moments where her game plan is looking like it's shining through. I just think all in all, over 3 rounds, I think Calderwood is the better striker. That's where the fight, in my opinion, is going to be won and lost. That's where the significant advantage is in this fight in regards to skill sets. I'm picking Joanne Calderwood to win this fight. And in the next fight, I love this fight between 2 prospects, in my opinion. We've got Hakeem Dawodu versus Movsar Evloev. Evloev is currently the -235 favourite. The comeback on Dawodu at +195 as the underdog. As for where the value is on the betting line, again, it's one of those lines where I really agree with. You know, I'd be shocked if the line was much wider. I'd be shocked if it was much shorter. I think it's right where it needs to be. If you are looking for a value side, I do think that very slightly, if you're pushing me, that Evloev at -235 is the better bet than Dawodu at +195. As for where the betting line moves throughout fight week, I do think that there's going to be a little bit of fluctuation, as I always say. Of course, there's always fluctuation on either side, but I don't think the betting line is going to move too much. Again, I feel like people are thinking in the same way in regards to Evloev. Might be a bet at -235. He'll probably get thrown into some parlays, which will add to that betting line, but I don't think people are going to be too high on putting the hard-earned money on Dawodu to get the better of Evloev and get his hand raised on the night. So for that reason, I do think that the line of Evloev will push up to maybe -245, -250 come fight night on Saturday night. Now, as for how this fight plays out, it's going to be a really good fight in my opinion. You've got Dawodu that's very aggressive, comes with forward pressure, aggression, he's got anger on his face, he loves to wing big bombs and just make fights explosive and ruthless. Whereas Evloev, on the other hand, is more technical, he's more calm, he's more comfortable, he's more relaxed. relaxed in the cage when it comes to his striking. He's got really good fundamentals from his jab, 1-2, to just making the right decisions at the right time. He's a very smart fighter. And he's also the fighter in this spot that's going to be able to mix things up much better, because if Dawodu does get a little bit too much for Evloev on the feet and the striking, Evloev will just level change. He'll use his wrestling. He will be able to take Dawodu down, and he will be able to spend extended periods of time on top. And I also think that's going to be the path of least resistance to Evloev. So I almost think that it's going to take a few striking exchanges for Evloev to think, actually, I'm going to try a takedown and see what happens, because Dawodu is firing power at me. And then I think that once Evloev gets a takedown and has some success on top, spends extended periods of time on top in that one takedown, he's going to realise that that is his path to least resistance, and I think that's where he's just going to take the fight from there. I actually feel that the fight is going to be won and lost because of the wrestling and grappling in this fight, and that's where I see Evloev being the much better fighter. Now, Dawodu went to a close fight with Takugov last time out, and I think that Evloev has a very similar style to Takugov, but he's just better in every area, so I actually think that Dawodu's getting a similar opponent this time out, just an opponent that's better in every single aspect of mixed martial arts, and that's going to show on the night. I think that Evloev's going to be fine striking with Dawodu. I just feel that once he gets a taste for that wrestling, he takes Dawodu down and he has time on top of him, the fight IQ of Evloev will kick in. As I've already mentioned, he's a smart fighter. I think he'll take that path of least resistance. I'm picking Movsar Evloev to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Pannie Kianzad versus Alexis Davis. Kianzad is currently the -190 favourite. They'll come back on Davis at +165 as the underdog. As for where the value is on the betting line, I do think the value sits with the underdog in Alexis Davis. Time and time again, she's the underdog, and time again, she either shows up and wins or makes a fight super close to the point where you don't know who's going to win when the scorecards are being read out. And with this fight in particular, I think it's going to be a tale of two styles, which I'll talk about shortly. So for me, the line should be much closer. The value side is the +165 on Alexis Davis. Now, as for where the betting line moves throughout fight week, the current trend is the money on Davis. Kianzad was a bigger favourite a couple of days ago, so I agree with that trend, and I also think it's going to continue to come in. Now, I only think it'll come in so far before money starts coming back in on Kianzad. Kianzad is the fighter that's the younger fighter, the fighter that has got more hype on her right now, and that's what's keeping this line wide. But if this gets down to Kianzad being -160, -170, I think money will start to come in on her, pushing her back up to around -175, -180, and that's ultimately where I think that the betting line's going to close, with Kianzad being the favourite. Now, as for how this fight plays out, as I've already mentioned in the introduction to this breakdown, I think it's going to be a fight which is a tale of two styles. You've got Kianzad that's absolutely the better striker with the more volume, more fluid on the feet, against the fighter in Davis that's going to want to take the fight to the mat and lay heavy on top, and it's which fighter is going to be able to implement the game plan. Now, I think Kianzad's going to have success early. I think she's a good fighter. I bet on her against Betch Kohea at a pick'em, I think it was, so I cashed that bet. I love Pannie Kianzad. She came through for me on that night, and I think she's a good fighter. But as I've already said as well, Davis is the type of fighter time and time again we write off, and I've been guilty of this in the past as well, of saying that she's not the fighter that she once was, and she's declining and she's getting up in age, but she keeps proving everybody wrong, including myself, and she's able to follow a game plan and stick to it, and I think that's where she's going to have success in this fight. I think she is going to get pieced up by Pannie Kianzad. If this fight is a 15-minute kickboxing fight, I think Kianzad wins this hands down, and she'll end up looking like a -350, -400 favourite. But this is mixed martial arts, and I don't think that Alexis Davis is just going to allow herself to get pieced up for 15 minutes in this fight. She's going to score takedowns. She's going to have top control time. If she can get Pannie Kianzad down, I think she's going to have a lot of success. We saw her against Betch Kohea. Pannie Kianzad, it was a slip. She ended up on her back, and Kohea followed her down into the guard and managed to actually have some success on Kianzad. Not any dangerous success, but just holding her down. Again, extended periods of time, running that clock down and winning minutes in the rounds. And if Betch Kohea can do that on top of Pannie Kianzad, then Alexis Davis definitely will be able to. So I think that Alexis Davis is way more live than what the betting line suggests. I think she is going to be able to score takedowns in this fight. I think she might only need one takedown in 2 rounds to be able to take 2 out of the 3 rounds should it go to the scorecards as well. So I think that Alexis Davis has got a solid path to victory. Now, if she doesn't get the takedowns, she is going to lose this fight, but I think that because of the gap in skill on the feet, with Pannie Kianzad being the much better striker, it's going to force the takedowns out of Davis. I think she's going to be able to get a couple. I'm picking Alexis Davis to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a fight that was only finalised yesterday. We've got Matt Frevola versus Terrence McKinney, who steps in on short notice to replace Frank Camacho. Camacho was in a car accident and unfortunately had to pull out of this fight, so I'm wishing all the best for Frank Camacho. Wishing a speedy recovery, and I hope he's okay. As for this fight, Matt Frevola is currently the -265 favourite. The comeback on Terrence McKinney at +225 as the underdog. As for where the value is on the betting line, honestly, I know it's short notice, but I think the value sits with McKinney at +225. Obviously, it's his UFC debut as well, so a lot of people might be surprised about that, but at +225, at the very least with McKinney, you're going to get a fighter that's fighting for your money, but I actually think that he's a pretty skilled fighter and that this fight is going to be wild, that could end in the blink of an eye in a single moment, so the +225 side for me is the value side. As for where the betting line moves throughout fight week, I do think we're going to see some more money coming in on McKinney. I think McKinney's going to close in this fight at around +180, +185, with Matt Frevola being around the -225 line. Now, as for how this fight plays out, the one concern I've got for McKinney is the fact it's short notice. I don't think he's the type of fighter that's going to be fazed by UFC debut jitters. He just looks like a complete ball of energy that'll just go in there, have fun, do his thing, go at 100 miles an hour and just try and finish his fighter like he always does. Doesn't strike me as the type of guy that is going to adrenaline dump or be really affected by UFC jitters. The one concern I do have is the fact that he's short notice and that he does start fights really fast. In fact, he's just got a fast pace throughout, and I just wonder that if this fight does go late, then what shape is he in? What sort of preparation has he had with this short notice call up just a few days before he needs to weigh in? But actually on the flip side with Frevola, he's not exactly a fighter that will be completely fresh in round 3 and look exactly the same as what he did in round 1. I'm not saying he's got bad cardio, because that would be untrue to say. He does have good cardio, he does push a pace himself as well, but the fact is he just naturally slows down as well. So I don't think McKinney's in a horrible spot in regards to the cardio. I just think that both fighters are going to tire the longer it goes on, and whoever tires more is the fighter that's likely going to lose the later rounds. But this fight for me is going to be fireworks. McKinney's good everywhere. He's a good striker, he's explosive, he'll throw big kicks and he doesn't care if you take him down because he's got good jiu-jitsu, he's got good wrestling, he's got a wrestling background as well. And he also, from an offensive perspective, likes to take his opponents down. But the thing is, so does Frevola. Frevola's all these things as well. Frevola's also a big ball of energy. Frevola's also a fighter that loves forward pressure, that loves to throw big strikes. The difference is Frevola's more of a boxing big striker, whereas McKinney's more of a kickboxing big striker. One likes to punch, one likes to kick, but then Frevola also likes to shoot takedowns. He's also got good jiu-jitsu himself, and this is why I think that the betting line is way too wide, because not only do they match up well stylistically, but the fight's going to be crazy and wild and fought at a mad pace. So as I've already mentioned, the fight could just end in a single moment, end in the blink of an eye. So the +225 line on McKinney is just a good line for how I see this fight playing out. But I actually think that if anybody can come in on short notice and push the pace and break somebody like Frevola, it would be somebody like McKinney. If McKinney wasn't active, if he was a fighter that was more technical and engaged a little less in his fights, then somebody like Frevola would steamroll through them. Pun intended, I'm here all week, but somebody like Frevola would do a lot better against that type of fighter, but McKinney's going to match the pace, he's going to match the aggression, he's going to match the volume, and I actually think that he is a good fighter that's going to be able to go into the UFC after this debut, put some wins together. I think he's going to be a nightmare opponent for a lot of fighters. I'm picking Terrence McKinney to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Steven Peterson versus Chase Hooper. Peterson is the slight -115 favourite. The comeback on Hooper, the slight -105 underdog. As for where the value is on the betting line, the lines are really close. It's almost a pick'em. It is a pick'em in some books as well. So if you've got a good read on either side, then either side is absolutely playable. If you are going to push me for a value side, I would say Steven Peterson at -115 probably does have that slight edge in value on the current betting line. But if you've got a good read, as I've said, either side is playable. As for where the betting line moves throughout fight week, there is a trend on other books right now that is pushing this Steven Peterson line wider. Is -125 at other books. I do think that that trend will continue throughout. I think Peterson can only go so high as a favourite, maybe -140 at the absolute peak, but I feel at -140 there's going to be a ton of money coming back in on Chase Hooper because of his win condition and how good he is on the mat. But I do think around that minus 125 betting line is where Steven Peterson's going to close, with Chase Hooper at around plus 100. Now, as for how this fight plays out, it's a bit of a strange one really, because I feel that Steven Peterson is, well, he's absolutely the more experienced fighter. He's definitely more well-rounded. He's the better striker. He's the better wrestler. I'm not convinced he's the better grappler, but it's close. The problem that I have with Peterson is he puts himself in really bad positions in his fights, bad places. Sometimes it's unforced errors as well, and that does have cause for concern, because my head is telling me, well, Peterson's going to go in there, he's going to outstrike him, he's not going to allow Hooper to take him down. If he does get taken down, he's got good jiu-jitsu himself, so he's going to be able to get back up to his feet. But something just in the back of my mind is telling me that Peterson, for all these advantages that he's going to have, he's going to do something, he's going to make a mistake, he's going to make an error, and Hooper's going to be able to capitalize on it. Steven Peterson is the better fighter, but come Sunday, if I didn't watch the fight and somebody told me that Chase Hooper choked Steven Peterson out on the mat, I'm not going to be shocked. I'll be like, okay, yeah, I get it. So again, it's just a gut feeling that I've got that Peterson's going to do something that he shouldn't, make an error that's ultimately going to cost him the fight. But the thing is, when it comes to analysing fights, when it comes to picking fights and making a prediction, I do have to stick with what my head tells me and with what my eyes see in tape. I think Steven Peterson's the better fighter. He's the better striker, as I've already mentioned. I've also mentioned he's the better wrestler. The jiu-jitsu, I'm not convinced, but again, it's close. I just feel that this fight could potentially be another bad fight for Chase Hooper, where he's going to need a Hail Mary submission to win, which, as I've already mentioned, my gut's telling me he could get. But I do think that Peterson's going to have success with his striking. I think he's going to be able to land volume. I think he's going to be able to hit Hooper hard. And if he starts getting Hooper moving backwards, then that's just going to make it a super easy fight for Peterson, as I don't think Hooper's going to be able to be effective moving backwards. He definitely needs to be the one moving forwards. And like I say, if Hooper's moving forwards, Peterson's going to be cracking him with hard shots. That at some point is going to cause hesitancy for Hooper moving forward. So stylistically, I do think Peterson's got a lot of advantages, the more well-rounded fighter. And outside of that Hail Mary finish from Chase Hooper, I think Peterson wins. I'm picking Steven Peterson to win this fight. And in the next fight, again, a fight under the radar that I'm really looking forward to. We've got Fares Ziam versus Luigi Vendramini. Ziam is currently the minus 135 favourite. The comeback on Vendramini at plus 115 as the underdog. As for where the value is on the betting line, once again, I think the books have done a really good job here. I think the betting line is accurate, and it's roughly where I'd see it being lined as well. If you are going to force me for a value side, I would probably edge towards Ziam at minus 135 being the slightly better bet than Vendramini at plus 115. But again, there's not really much in it in my opinion. I think it's going to be a fun fight. As for where the betting line moves throughout fight week, there's been a lot of fluctuation here. Vendramini opened the slight underdog. It then got bet into a pick'em. Then a huge ton of money came in on Ziam over the last 48 hours, pushed him to minus 140. Then overnight, before recording this podcast now, there has been some more money come back in on Vendramini. So the money's flying a little bit everywhere right now. So it's hard to tell if Ziam is going to close at around this minus 135 or if it's going to go back to a pick'em again. Ultimately, I think at around minus 125 is where it's going to close, and I think Vendramini will be around plus 100 in that spot. Now, as for how this fight plays out, I think the advantages for Ziam in regards to the physical advantages, he's taller, he's longer, he's rangier, bigger arm reach, bigger leg reach. I think all this sort of thing is going to really help him when it comes to the moments in striking, because Vendramini is a fighter that I actually like a lot. I think he's a ball of energy. I think he's tough to deal with. He's got explosive striking. He comes forwards in bursts, but then he's got good takedowns. He's got really good jiu-jitsu as well. I mean, not many men can say that they took Zaleski dos Santos's back in the UFC debut on short notice, up a weight class. So Vendramini's definitely got his skills and qualities. The problem that I have with Vendramini is I just haven't seen enough minutes of him inside a cage. They're always really quick finishes or fights that just aren't accessible to watch. So it's really tough to gauge a solid read on Vendramini. But what I am confident in here is that Vendramini is going to need takedowns. He's going to need to use his topside grappling in order to win, because not only is Ziam, as I've already mentioned, much taller, much longer, and has a bigger reach in his arms and his legs, but he's also a very good technical striker. That's where his base lies, in that Muay Thai. He pieces fighters up methodically, logically. He doesn't overload in his punches. And I just think that the striking prowess of Ziam, coupled with his physicality and his youth, I think that he's going to pose a lot of problems for Vendramini. I don't think those forward bursts of energy with short bursts of strikes is going to be that effective against somebody like Ziam. So I think Vendramini is going to need his wrestling and his grappling. And this is where ultimately I see him falling short, because although his takedowns are nice, there's something about them that I can't put my finger on. He either doesn't commit to him or he just needs development in that area. And the thing is with Ziam, a lot of fighters try and take him down because of who he is as a striker. So his takedown defense is actually getting much more improved. And if you watch his fights in chronological order, you'll see the improvements from fight to fight. And also his get-up game's improving from fight to fight as well. So I think that Vendramini might be able to score a takedown or two, but ultimately I don't think he's going to do a lot with it, which is going to force this fight to be being won and lost on the feet. And that's where I think that Ziam's the better fighter. I don't think he's going to absolutely whitewash Vendramini, but like I said, his physical advantages, his striking prowess, his technical ability, his methodical breakdown of his fighters on the feet in the striking department, I think will shine in this fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Fares Ziam to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Carlos Felipe versus Jake Collier. Felipe is currently the minus 170 favourite. The comeback on Collier at plus 150 as the underdog. As for where the value is on the betting line, I see a lot of people seeing a lot of value in Jake Collier. Personally, I don't see it. I think the value's with Carlos Felipe at minus 170. Stylistically, I understand why people like Collier, but stylistically, I think Felipe's got a good fight ahead of him. I think the minus 170 betting line is the one that is the better bet than the plus 150 on Jake Collier. As for where the betting line moves throughout fight week, Felipe was a much bigger favourite. Like I said, a lot of people like Collier. That money came in on him, closed the line up quite a lot, but now there's a little bit of a trend on the money coming back in on Felipe. I don't think it's going to change too much from now, though. I think the big line movements in this fight has already happened with the line closing up a little bit. Ultimately, when both fighters step into the cage on Saturday night, I think the betting lines are going to be roughly where they're sitting right about now. Now, as for how this fight plays out, when you actually look at the previous fights in the UFC, there's actually a lot of really interesting things to take note of. First of all, Jake Collier against John Vellante, outputting 123 strikes, 100 plus strikes, which is something I'm pretty sure nobody saw coming from Collier. And then from Felipe's perspective, UFC debut against Spivak, he loses that quite comfortably. A lot of people aren't that high on Felipe anymore, but since then Spivak's actually looked quite good. So that loss in itself didn't age too badly for Felipe at all. But then his next two fights, he beat Jorgen De Castro. At the time, people thought that was a phenomenal win. Then he beats Justin Tafa. I actually think Tafa won that fight. I think that fight was a bad decision, but he beats him regardless. That fight looks like it was a tough fight on paper, but since then Jorgen De Castro really hasn't done much, hasn't looked that great. Tafa didn't look that great last time out. So those two wins for Felipe have aged quite badly. So it's really funny how that works out, but looking at this fight from a style versus style perspective, I do feel that Carlos Felipe is going to be able to have success against Collier. I think the reason why Collier had so much success against Vellante is because Vellante just couldn't dig deep and push through that fire. You know, he's a bit of an aging fighter himself. He's a fighter that's a blown up heavyweight also. And I just don't think that he could push through those tough moments in the fight, make this fight dirty, gritty and ugly. Whereas Carlos Felipe is going to absolutely be comfortable in driving through those tough moments. Fighting fire with fire, that's what he does. And I think when Collier starts to really pour some volume on Felipe and he realises Felipe isn't going anywhere, he's not taking a backward step and he's coming forwards, I think that's going to turn Collier into defensive mode. He's not going to be able to start outputting that sort of offence that he did last time out. And what that's going to do is it's going to draw Carlos Felipe on, and Felipe is then going to start taking over the fight, landing his own volume, controlling the pace, controlling the range of the fight as well, which controlling the range is really important for Felipe, and the pace as well. Those two things, if Felipe can grab control of them, then he's not getting forced into areas of the fight at speeds that he doesn't like. If he can control that range, control that pace, he's going to be able to be comfortable at this level in the UFC, and that's what I see happening against Jake Collier. I think Collier's going to have some moments early on. He's going to test Felipe and see what he's about, but like I said, once he starts hitting Felipe. Felipe is not going anywhere. He's not taking a backward step, and he's coming forwards and he's walking through the fire that Collier's delivering. I think Collier's going to go into defensive mode. He's going to draw the offense back out of Carlos Felipe, and Carlos Felipe will start looking good for as long as the fight goes on. That's why I think that stylistically this fight does favour Felipe, and for that reason I'm picking Carlos Felipe to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of On the Moneyline. I hope you all enjoyed it. And as always, fight fans, I'd appreciate all the likes to the video and subscriptions to our MMA Play 365 YouTube channel too. Remember, you can get all the betting advice you'll ever need over at MMAplay365.com. We cater for long-term gamblers that like to build their own bets and strategies, gamblers that just want to follow exactly what I bet on, and we also cater for you fun gamblers that like the long shot fun parlays, or ACCAs, accumulators as we call them in the UK. Even if you only want our best value underdog for the event, which comes with a money back guarantee, by the way. So if we lose, if the fighter loses, you will get your money back refunded in full. We have plenty of different packages and subscription options for you guys to choose from, which also includes our DFS packages for DraftKings and FanDuel as well. All our subscriptions are at very affordable prices. Just hop onto MMAplay365.com and see what's best for you. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you at the next event.